Do you often become breathless while doing passages in read aloud? Do you struggle to get a decent score in read aloud? If the answers are yes, then this video is for you. In today's video, we will be talking about the significance of sense groups in mastering read aloud. Native English speakers, while communicating, do not speak word by word. They divide the sentence into small group of words. These group of words are called sense groups. And the native speakers also pause after every sense group. In the sentence, I went to the market to buy chocolates. It can be divided into two sense groups. They are, I went to the market to buy chocolates. It is usually seen that students, while practicing read aloud, become breathless. This hampers their continuity and plunges their score. If you make sense groups, you can avoid this problem. While pausing after every sense group, you get the time to breathe. And sense groups also provide clarity and enhance understanding for the listeners. And don't forget, in read aloud, our listener is the algorithm. PTE aspirants usually think that they just have to stop at a comma or full stop. But this is not correct. It is important to make sense groups and pause briefly after every sense group. Each sentence can have one or more than one sense groups. There are no rules to make sense groups. Different people pause at different places to make sense groups, and that's perfectly fine. You can make sense group based on your breathing patterns or purely on your instinct. Let us now learn the art of making sense groups. Before electric lighting, adults generally slept about 9 hours per night. I would like to discuss this sentence and make sense groups in two ways. In the first one, we can see we have 4 sense groups. Before electric lighting, adults generally slept about 9 hours per night. So the slash shows a pause. Now just observe how I pause at the end of every sense group. Before electric lighting, adults generally slept about 9 hours per night. Another way of doing it is making it into 5 sense groups. Before electric lighting, adults generally slept about 9 hours per night. Both the ways are equally correct. Let's talk about another sentence. Emma Carl was a French translator who worked in early 20th century. She received a lot of accolades for her work. Now this has been divided into 4 sense groups. Observe how I pause at the end of the sense group. Emma Carl was a French translator who worked in the early 20th century. She received a lot of accolades for her work. In another way, you can divide it into 6 sense groups. Emma Carl was a French translator who worked in the early 20th century. She received a lot of accolades for her work. Let's try one more. In many countries, education is not only a right but also an obligation. Now this sentence has been divided into 3 sense groups. In many countries, education is not only a right but also an obligation. We can also break it into 4 sense groups. In many countries, education is not only a right but also an obligation. Having learnt about the art of making sense groups, now let us talk about focus words. Every sense group has a focus word, which is usually the last content word of that sense group. By content word, I mean that it can be a noun, verb, adjective, or adverb. These focus words are stressed more than other words in the sentence. They are pronounced longer and louder. Let us see the previous examples. In this sentence, lighting, slept, hours, and night are focus words. Now they will be spoken longer and louder, and definitely we will pause after every sense group. Before electric lighting, adults generally slept about 9 hours per night. And in the other way we can say, before electric lighting, adults generally slept about 9 hours per night. Let's look at another example. Here you can see that translator, century, accolades and work are your focus words. Emma Carl was a French translator who worked in the early 20th century. She received a lot of accolades for her work. And in this sentence, we are breaking it into more sense groups. So the focus words are Carl, translator, century, received, accolades and work. So let's repeat it. Emma Carl was a French translator who worked in the early 20th century. She received a lot of accolades for her work. And lastly, let's see this sentence. You can see we have the focus words as countries, right and obligation. In many countries, education is not only a right but also an obligation. And in this one, we have 4 focus words: countries, education, right and obligation. So we can say it as, in many countries, education is not only a right but also an obligation. I'm sure that you have understood the concept of making sense groups, identifying focus words, focusing on focus words and pausing after every sense group. So here's an activity for you. Just try to make the sense group and identify the focus words. You can see that the focus words have been marked and the sense groups have been made. I would like to repeat that there are many other ways of making sense groups also. This is one of the ways. So let's read it once. Many castles were built in Japan in the early 17th century. Most of these structures have subsequently been demolished or destroyed. Of the handful that survive, this one is the most complete and unaltered. Conservation work in the middle of the 20th century was carried out using advanced techniques.